Hello Year 11. I'm just going to talk to you about creating flashcards. We've spoke a lot about using the Need to Know books to create revision materials, but I just want to go through and show you how you might actually generate your flashcards. We know that the Need to Know books are really useful for spaced learning, for retrieval practice, dual coding, which is where we've got both information and images, and also for this idea of interleaving between topics within a subject and interleaving between subjects across all the curriculums that you study. So I'm going to focus today on the best strategy, in my opinion, which is the maximum 25 word strategy. You can't go wrong with this strategy in terms of allowing it to provoke thought. In order for you to retrieve knowledge into your working memory, we need to be able to engage in the process of thought. And asking yourself to think about the revision is simply not enough. Learning and retrieval is a byproduct of an activity. So we need to ensure that when we are creating our resources and we are using our resources, including our flashcards, we are engaging in thought. So I'm going to make a little flashcard today on crude oil, organic chemistry, obviously as a science teacher, and I'm just going to show you how I might go about that. So I'm going to start with what crude oil is, because that's where we start in the topic. Crude oil is a mixture. So to avoid using words, I'm going to represent this idea of crude oil as a mixture by using Dalton's atomic model, the simple sphere, and showing that we might have a compound and an element that are not attached. They've not been chemically bonded. So we've got compounds and we've got elements within the same piece of equipment or within the same substance, and they are not bonded together. So this diagram here reminds me that crude oil is a mixture without having to write the word mixture. And therefore, by looking at that diagram, I am forcing my brain to engage in thought and to try to retrieve what I meant when I drew this diagram. I'm going to remind myself at this point, and I'm conscious of the amount of words that I'm using, but I'm going to remind myself that crude oil can be broken down into two very useful categories of substances: fuels and petrochemicals. And some of these substances are made up of alkanes and alkenes. And I'm going to look at now the difference between an alkane and an alkene. And we're branching now towards the end of the first lesson. So an alkane, an example of an alkane might be CH4. And I can see that here on my Need to Know page just above. And I'm also going to remind myself of how I draw CH4. So we've got one carbon for 4 hydrogens, and because it's an alkane, they have just single bonds. And to avoid using the word bonds, I've just put the one line there to represent what goes on in an alkane. Now, with alkanes, you need to know the first 4, and these are all represented here in the Need to Know book. To save on space and to try and get as much of this topic onto one flashcard as possible, I am going to simply write the formulas for the first 4 alkanes, the shortest 4 alkanes. And you do need to know the names of those as well, which we can see here on our Need to Know book. Now, with an alkene, and we'll talk about how we get to alkenes in a minute, they have double bonds. And I'm going to represent that by using what looks like an equals sign here. And I've got this from this section of my Need to Know book. So it's useful to not only work your way through the topic and put down what you know, but keep referring back to the Need to Know book as well. Alternatively, if you don't feel as confident with the curriculum or with the content in front of you, we could just rely on the Need to Know book to make the page. So the first alkene would be CH2, because in an alkane, the general formula is CnH2n plus 2, but in an alkene, the general formula is CnH2n. These do not count, none of this counts in my word count, okay? So at the minute, I'm on 7 words out of 25. I'm forcing my brain to engage in the thought process because I am using the minimal words possible. Now, I don't necessarily need to know the names of the formulas of the first 4 alkenes, but we can certainly write down a couple extra anyway. So C2 would become H4, C3 would be H6, and C4 would become H8. At this point, I'm just going to go back and write the word plankton and remind myself that crude oil consists of mainly plankton that's been fossilized over many years. Now, as I work my way down these hydrocarbon chains, there are 3 properties that change, and I can see these 3 properties stated here in my Need to Know book. The boiling point, the viscosity, just trying to squeeze it all in here, and also the flammability. Now, as I move down my alkane group and my hydrocarbons get longer, my boiling points go up. As I move down my alkane group and my hydrocarbons get longer, my viscosity goes up. And as I move down my alkane group and my hydrocarbons get longer, my flammability goes down. And there I've just recalled the 3 properties, forced myself to engage in thought, and I've used arrows instead of words to try and reduce my word count. So we've got there pretty much lesson 1 from the organic topic and lesson 3. Pretty much there down on that flashcard in front of us. So what might lesson 4 look like? Well, how do we get to an alkene? We need to carry out a chemical reaction called cracking. Okay, and cracking is where we take an alkane, which is long, and we turn it into an alkene and a short alkane. Long alkanes can be quite useless because of all their bonds. So by using cracking to break down a long useless alkane, we can get an alkene and a shorter alkane, which will be much more useful as fuels. Now I'm going to remind myself here as well that there are 2 types of cracking. We have steam cracking, where we use steam and heat in order to allow this reaction. And the second type of cracking is catalytic cracking, again, where we use heat, but this time we use a catalyst instead. So we've got some of the properties of alkenes mentioned there. We know the general formula. We know that they are double bonded. And that is because, or this allows us, to say that alkenes are unsaturated. They are much more useful as a fuel because they have bonds that are free to react with other atoms or elements. The final thing that I'm going to put on this flashcard is how we test for an alkene or an alkane. And we use bromine water. And if it is an alkene, then the bromine water will turn colourless. So I pretty much got down there on one flashcard 3 out of the 4 lessons for organic chemistry. The only thing that I've not got down is this little bit from the Need to Know book on fractional distillation. And I can always, to keep organic chemistry on one card, turn over the card and maybe draw the diagram of the fractional distillation column, talk about some of the uses of the fuels, and talk about how fractional distillation works, because that is a common 3-4 mark question. Now, obviously here I've made and shown you how to make a flashcard on organic chemistry, which is from the chemistry paper 2 topic, but this can be done for every single subject where you have lots and lots of content to revise. It's all about chunking the information, using the minimum words as possible, and the maximum 25 word rule is a really good one to use. Diagrams, pictures, flow charts, tables, graphs, arrows, things that allow you, when you come back to use this flashcard, to plug in the gaps and use thought. That will force your working memory to retrieve the knowledge and makes it much more likely for that information to stick.